Get ready to feel old, because this year marks the 25th anniversary of the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That's right, the long-running franchise launched on PlayStation back in 1999, kickstarting an era full of extreme sports games based on pretty much everything and anything that you can imagine. All this talk about the quarter-century birthday got me wondering what Electronic Gaming Monthly thought of this series. What was their favorite Tony Hawk title? As it turns out, EGM reviewed a total of 24 games in the Tony Hawk franchise between 1999 and 2008. This includes pretty much all the mainline games, including several different ports and even the stripped-down versions that populated the handheld systems. Sadly, the magazine folded before they had a chance to review Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 or either of those motion-controlled games that employed the fake plastic skateboard peripheral. Thankfully, they managed to cover pretty much everything else, including most of the key titles that you would hope to see on a list like this. What we're going to do today is count down the best and worst Tony Hawk games using Electronic Gaming Monthly's own words and scores. There's no editorializing here, we're just gonna focus on what the critics said back when these games first came out. Ooh, I hope you bought a good helmet, because you're gonna need it when EGM ranks the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise.
Look at what we're launching. Now for N64 and Game Boy Advance, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. We're talking lots of new tricks and hundreds of insane new combos. There's even more courses, a park designer, and a dream team of skaters to choose from. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 for N64 and Game Boy Advance. Rated E for everyone.
Alright, we're gonna kick things off with number 24, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the Game Boy Color. Tony Hawk is such a great home game that you'd think they would have put more time and effort into crafting the portable version. Instead, what we get is a run-of-the-mill skateboarding game that feels pointless, has no goal, and isn't half the game its console cousins are. It's like whoever developed this game didn't even play the home version to find out what makes the game fun. Number 23, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the Game Boy Color. The first Tony Hawk on Game Boy Color was basically a joke. It didn't capture anything from the PlayStation version. Thankfully, Natsumi seems to have learned from past mistakes, as the sequel actually feels more like its PlayStation cousin. However, it still doesn't capture that special something. But before you get your panties in a bunch asking, how can a Game Boy version of a PlayStation game even come close to the original? I say, go play Dave Mirra BMX on the Game Boy Color. Number 22, Tony Hawk's Proving Ground on both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The first few hours of Proving Ground are shamefully sloppy. Skating around an ugly, unimaginative city in the midst of trying to keep up with a confusing career structure isn't fun. Once you've played enough to unlock a full arsenal of moves, things improve noticeably, but the narrative and competitions rarely offer more than the typical Tony Hawk tomfoolery. Just like that, the series is a shadow of what a skateboarding game can truly be. Number 21, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the PlayStation. I look at Tony 3 on PS1 this way. If the PS2 Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 didn't exist, would this scaled-down version still be a worthy sequel? Not really. It looks more like the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater than the spiffier Tony 2. The revert doesn't revolutionize gameplay like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2's manual. This is the first PS1 installment in the series not made by Neversoft, and it shows. Number 20, Tony Hawk's American Wasteland on the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. Tony, you are looking haggard. Even though I like American Wasteland's Country Boy in the City storyline much better than last year's World Destruction Tours, the annual sequels will drive this franchise into the ground if Activision doesn't take a break, and soon. Most of the game involves building up your skate ranch with scavenged, repurposed urban detritus that you earn through challenges. But really, that stuff's just filler. Hawk's best moments are still all about impossibly long combos. That much never seems to change. Number 19, Tony Hawk's Downhill Jam on the Wii. I'm a downhill jam believer. Thanks to the ease of maintaining your balance with the remote, I could easily nose grind all day, but that's not what jam is all about. Adrenaline junkies and aerial acrobats will no doubt satisfy their extreme sports palate thanks to some of the most well thought out track designs I've come across in an action racer. Bonus points for the use of the remote speaker for crashes and grinds. SSX vets will feel right at home with Downhill Jam. Number 18, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 on the Game Boy Advance. Most of the big changes for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 have been incorporated into this highly competent Game Boy Advance version. Unfortunately, some of the aspects that are especially cool about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on non-handhelds, namely the gorgeous graphics, gigantic levels, and awesome level designs, couldn't intrinsically make it to the Game Boy Advance. For what it is, it's an enjoyable game that'll tide you over on a long car ride to your aunt and uncle's house where you can, once you arrive, enjoy the real Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Number 17, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X on the Xbox. Depending on how you approach this game, you'll either be thrilled or a bit let down. I say this because 2X is not a sequel, but more of a director's cut or a remix or something in that vein. If you've never played a Tony Hawk game, 2X is a tremendous value. You get to play the ultra smooth and prettier incarnations of Tony Hawk 1 and 2, plus the expansion levels. If you're a big fan, by all means march right down to your local shop and buy it. Chances are you'll dig wading through the old familiar levels on your way to the new and exciting stuff. Casual fans, however, should just rent 2X and save their cash for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. Number 16, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the Nintendo 64. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater continues to amaze me. Even on the N64, it's great. It's a touch smoother than the PlayStation version, and maybe slightly better looking as well. The game's strongest selling point, however, continues to be the intuitive trick system and flawless camera work. The gameplay, the music, the atmosphere, it's all top notch. Number 15, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the PlayStation. You're not going to find a better skateboarding game than this on the PlayStation. The control is intuitive, performing tricks is easy, and when you crash, you feel it. The courses are the best thing here. They swirl everywhere and are crammed with trick opportunities. Practice enough and you'll get into a zone where you can build tricks on top of tricks on top of tricks. It's almost a Zen thing. Number 14, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the Game Boy Advance. This is an unbelievable handheld version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. The stages are all very similar to their PlayStation big brother, and all the moves and the animations you can want have been retained in the transformation from full 3D gameplay to the isometric view of the Game Boy Advance. But no matter how impressed the feat is, it doesn't change the fact that the awesome control scheme loses something in the translation. In this view, and with this button layout, the game is tremendously awkward at first. I foresee a lot of people getting frustrated with this game. Number 13, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the Game Boy Advance. This game's prequel proved that Tony could be made tiny and still pull off the same sick gameplay as its big console brothers. So, the sequel packs little wow factor. We've seen and done it all before. But that doesn't mean it's any less fun. The game doesn't nearly duplicate the big version's teeming, dynamic environments, but what you get is still darn good for the GBA. And Tony 3 fills in the prequel's MIA features, such as the custom skater option and the multiplayer modes.
Hey, what's up?
Tony Hawk?
You ready?
Imagine if the world's greatest skaters challenged you to do their greatest stunts. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 is the ultimate challenge. With no time limit, huge free-roaming levels, 190 progressively harder goals, and the world's greatest skaters challenging you.
Hey, you okay?
Woo! Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, rated T for teen.
And we're back with number 12, Tony Hawk's Project 8 on the Xbox 360. Finally, we get a 360 Tony Hawk game that looks like a 360 game. I appreciate that the developers at Neversoft continue to experiment with the series, even though some of the experiments have gone horribly wrong. So while Nail the Trick hasn't completely won me over, I like where they're going with it. And sure, the variety and difficulty level is dandy, but I wish they had more fun with the level designs. I'm tired of grinding in schools and city halls. Give me haunted houses and pirate ships. Number 11, Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix on the PlayStation Portable. It's fairly shocking that a game this fast works this well on a handheld system. If you've played any of the recent Tony Hawk games, then you'll have exactly zero learning curves. Remix controls, plays, and looks virtually identical to Tony Hawk's Underground 2. Unfortunately, this means that the on-foot stuff still feels somewhat stiff and out of place. Beyond that, it's every bit as addictive as its big brother, with the addition of 4 new levels and a couple new multiplayer games. Number 10, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the GameCube. Amazing! As good as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was, 3 outdoes its predecessor in every way. Everything that you like about the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games is now supersized to satisfy even the most insatiable skateboard appetites. Sadly, the GameCube version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 suffers from a lack of online play, and most problematically, the GameCube controller itself. A few minutes with the flaccid analog stick and the tiny D-pad shows you just how made for the DualShock 2 Tony Hawk 3 truly is. Number 9, Tony Hawk's Underground 2 on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Another year, another Tony Hawk game with higher than ever expectations. Tony Hawk's Underground made waves last year with its fully revamped story mode. Tony Hawk's Underground 2's perfectly adequate and entertaining story mode, however, just doesn't and couldn't carry the same novelty. Thug 2 is better than Thug, and in turn is the most finely polished extreme sports game ever released. However, the degree in which it improves doesn't match the jump from Tony 4 to Thug, something fans should know before taking the plunge. Number 8, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the Dreamcast. Developer Treyarch had 2 goals in mind when they set out to port Tony Hawk's Pro Skater: to retain every gameplay nuance and to boost the visuals to Dreamcast standards. They've succeeded on both counts, from the detailed clothes to the skater's shadows to the extended draw distance. The visuals are 900 degrees ahead of the PlayStation game's graphics. Still, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater isn't worth getting if you already own the original. I just prefer playing it with the comfier PlayStation pad. Number 7, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the Nintendo 64. Maybe I've been playing too much of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the Dreamcast, because the environments in this N64 version look blurry to me. The background drawing is a bit pokey as well. Regardless, Neversoft and Edge of Reality have churned out another sweet Tony Hawk's Pro Skater title. It's amazing that the near 2-year-old engine is still kicking butt. Fluid animation, excellent camera work, and superior 2-player action remain the strong point of the title. Honestly, I don't know how they can make this game play better. It's awesome! Number 6, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the Xbox. To see if Tony Hawk 3 Xbox is right for you, see which category you fall into. 1. Never played Tony Hawk before? Give it a try. All the fuss and hype over the series is there for a reason, and the games are seriously dope, and you'll be hooked before you know it. 2. You really liked Tony Hawk 1, 2, and 2 WAGs, but haven't played any version of Tony 3 yet. Well, I don't know what you're waiting for, so when this game comes out, get it right away. And 3, you've played Tony 3 on another system. You may dig this Xbox version for its network play, the slightly smoother graphics, and the new stage, but these minor upgrades aren't worth the time, energy, and money to give Tony Hawk another run. You probably don't want to play it with an Xbox controller anyway, with its made-for-the-NBA player size. Number 5, Tony Hawk's Underground on PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. This franchise's life-affirming combo system, thrilling levels, and bulletproof gameplay continue to dazzle year after year. Tony Hawk's Underground's newfangled story mode is truly compelling, I also enjoyed getting off the deck to reach new heights, literally and figuratively, with all the new combo possibilities. So, why ain't I letting the platinum love flow? Fundamentally, Hawk hasn't evolved enough. It's basically a laundry list of goals, and the levels, though well-designed and fun, feel recycled. They just don't take my breath away like last year's. Number 4, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the PlayStation 2. I can't talk now. I gotta help a guy get his tongue unstuck from a frozen metal pole. Not what you expected me to say, is it? Tony 3 is taking a turn for the bizarre, but it's just what the doctor ordered. I love the levels. They're not only huge and well-designed, they're loaded with junk to do. The revert adds an infinite amount of scoring, and the land tricks are awesome. Neversoft must have made a deal with the devil because this series refuses to cool down. Number 3, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 on the PlayStation 2. I'm the world's biggest Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 fan, and I had very low expectations for 4. I mean, what else can they do with the already refined series? Well, as predicted, the near-perfect gameplay stayed relatively intact, with a few tweaks that make high-scoring combos easier to achieve. But what I didn't anticipate was getting hooked to Tony yet again. The new levels, a greater variety of minigame-like objectives, and a better unlock new stuff system means I'll be playing for weeks to come. Number 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the PlayStation. Take Tony Hawk, put in bigger levels, a park editor, a skate editor, more tricks, and even a better soundtrack. A winner? Hell yes! There's some really sick combos possible in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, thanks to the new manual system. It suffers a bit from the limited power of the PlayStation, but what game on the system doesn't? Go buy this game now, unless you want to wait for the Dreamcast version like me. And finally, in number 1, it's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the Dreamcast. Beyond the stuff that you'd expect to be different, like the pros, parks, and music, Neversoft has cooked up some truly innovative features for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. By balancing on 2 wheels between tricks, the manual feature lets you link them up like a madman. What's the difference between the PlayStation and the Dreamcast versions? Well, the draw distance is better, certain levels have much deeper and detailed backgrounds. Other than that, it's basically the same, but that's good enough. Fans of the genre or not, this is a no-brainer buy.
Has Tony Hawk gone insane? Tricking off a fire truck, a cop car, and freeway traffic? It's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, with 8 massive living levels that let you trick off of everything. Choose from 13 skaters, create a skater, a skate park, even play online.
What's Tony Hawk doing on the freeway?
Front side nose grind.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, rated E to T.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we have a whole playlist with dozens of episodes just like this one. We cover Mario, Sonic, Gran Turismo, Tekken, Resident Evil, Batman, Burnout, Crash Bandicoot, Metal Gear, Kirby, The Simpsons, Turok, and so many more. Give the playlist a binge when you have a spare afternoon or so. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite Tony Hawk game? Oh man, I think that this is probably one of those lists that gets it mostly right. It really is hard to top some of those first few Pro Skater games, and I probably would have had the PSP version of Thug 2 a little bit higher on the list. It really is the best portable version on the market, and at least it deserved to be in the top 10. Just narrowly missed that top 10. Go ahead and let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with a new episode of Limited Run Review Crew, where we'll see what the critics said about the Rocket Knight Adventure series. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,